welcome to Hard Talk.
Thank you. Good to be back.
It's great to have you on the show. Let me begin by asking you about your boss, Prime Minister Modi's grand ambition to have India become a fully developed nation, as he puts it, by 2047, to mark the centenary of India's modern nationhood. It's a grand ambition, but in all honesty, it's not possible, is it?
Not possible. I think it's going to be made possible well before the 100 years of independence are over. Let me set out, if you permit, my vision of what is at stake and what is doable realistically. We're already the fifth largest economy in the world. According to the Monetary Fund, the IMF, we should be the fourth largest during 2025 and possibly, if current rates of growth are maintained, the third largest economy before 2027.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt about the size.
Now it comes.
The size of your economy is beyond dispute, and the power of having 1.4, soon to be 1.5 billion people
1.4, yes,
is enormous,
yes.
No question. But economists reckon that to become fully developed, to use that phrase, i.e. to have a GDP per capita close to that of, say, Western Europe or the United States, you would need to grow by between 9 and 10% every single year to 2047. And that is not possible.
Let me put it to you differently. The size of the GDP is not in question. I ask you a counter question. Where has the developed country been defined? Point one. I mean, I know of no definition in the multilateral system. I know of countries being termed developing countries. I know of countries being termed least developed countries, and there is a listing of them. There's a system by which you graduate from being a least developed country to a developing country. Development has to be all comprehensive. I think in many respects we are already better developed than some of the so-called developed countries because it costs much less to provide those basic amenities in India.
But I ask you the broad question because you are a key minister responsible for energy, in your case petroleum and natural gas in this country. And if India is indeed to continue on this extraordinary growth path that you outline, then India's energy needs are going to be enormous. In fact, they're going to dominate global energy markets to a very real extent. It's going to leave India very energy dependent on outside energy sources, is it not?
Not really. India is both a large consumer and it's also a producer. Your assessment that if you have to become a developed country, you need a lot of energy is absolutely correct. But I could point to examples in history where the energy availability has been lacking and have to resource from outside, Japan being a case in point, but I won't go down that road. Today, our energy consumption is 5.5 million barrels a day, crude oil consumption.
Yeah,
and that is likely to go.
Pretty much 90% of your oil needs come from outside India.
From outside. But our domestic E&P, or exploration and production, which was neglected earlier, is now dramatically on the rise. Point one. Our biofuel blending, as our consumption goes up, our refining goes up, you know, on an expanding base, we are increasing our biofuel production, which next month will be 20%. So 20% of all the fuel consumed at the bunk is biofuel, which is all indigenous, domestic.
Well, you can talk about biofuels, you can talk about your grand plans for offshore oil exploration, which, by the way, the International Energy Agency has poured a lot of cold water on. But let us face facts. Right now, you are hugely dependent on supplies of relatively cheap oil from Russia. And that, I would suggest to you, makes you geopolitically very vulnerable.
Well, even for the sake of an argument, even just to carry on the discussion, I think those facts are not correct. We have diversified our sources of supply, which hitherto were 27. We are importing from 39 countries. And
if I may, last year almost 40% of your oil imports came from Vladimir Putin's Russia.
At one point it was 38%, it's coming down. But today, Stephen, the availability of oil, nobody is vulnerable to external oil. There's more oil coming on the international market. It's not what something I'm saying. Where the IEA is right is that of the total demand increase in the next 2 decades, 25% will come from India. On that, they are totally correct. But today there's more oil in the market than there are takers.
But let's just talk about the short term. You made this big bet on taking cheap oil from Russia against the wishes of the United States and your
Not against the wishes. I'm sorry, this is not against the wishes. The United States was.
It most certainly was against the wishes.
Not at
of the
all.
United
Not at
States.
all. Let me enlighten you. What the United States told us and told many others is that they wanted us to buy as much oil from Russia as we liked, as long as we bought it at a reasonable price. And that was music to my ears. There is no sanction on Russian oil then or now. None whatsoever.
Well, there's new sanctions now. Let's just talk about
let
them
me
for a moment.
first.
Hang on. All right, well, you made that point. Let's just talk about what Joe Biden did before he left office. He put new sanctions on Russian oil, including new sanctions on the shadow fleet of tankers that is ferrying oil as we speak from Russia to India. Many of the vessels that you relied on will no longer be able to operate. Some in India are calling this an oil shock for your country.
I'm not aware of anyone who has even a nodding acquaintance with the energy market calling this an oil shock. Let me share with you what actually has happened. There have never been sanctions on Russian energy per se. Russian oil coming or gas coming through a pipeline to Hungary has been exempt all along. Russian energy going through a pipeline to Japan has been exempt. And today also, Europe is buying 20-25% of its gas from Russia. So what the Americans, I was active, I was the negotiator then, said buy as much as you like, buy it reasonable. There was something called a price cap. Now it's music to my ears. If I can buy some from some source and I can buy it at a cheaper price, we are the winners.
Minister, let's get back to the point about the shadow fleet of tankers.
No, not at all. Let me tell you, because
let me just tell you, I hope you have a plan for what you're going to do when these tankers can't deliver you the oil.
Because if your assumptions are wrong, then you come to the wrong argumentation. First of all, the fleet doesn't bother us at all. We do not use fleets. We issue tenders at the point of importation. We will decide, one of our oil companies will decide, we want to import X amount of oil, global tender, whoever can supply it, delivered at our port. So if somebody has a fleet problem, it's their problem. Now, let me come back to the basic. Before February 2022, we imported 0.2% of oil from Russia. Today, it went up, but even in those last 2 years, sometimes Iraq was selling more. The main point to note is there is more oil coming on the global market, mostly from the Western Hemisphere, than there is need for that oil. So whenever there is a situation of more oil available, availability is not a problem and vulnerability does not arise.
It's interesting. I noticed as I was walking through your office a copy of The Economist magazine. I guess you read The Economist. You know what The Economist described your relationship with Russia as? A Faustian pact between Mr. Modi and President Putin. I believe President Putin is invited to come to Delhi very soon, isn't he?
Well, I think the Quad leaders will be coming here very soon. We buy $20 billion of energy from the United States. And let me also tell you...
I'm talking about Russia. I'm just interested in your relationship with Russia. Is it connected, the fact that you are so dependent right now on Russian energy, and India, from the very beginning, from the invasion of Ukraine by Putin's forces in February of 2022, India has refused to condemn that invasion. I guess these are connected, aren't they?
But I think you're jumping, hop, step and jump. Let me first, if you permit me, to give you some basic facts. We were told to buy Russian oil, because if we hadn't bought Russian oil and we had started buying our quantities of 5 million barrels a day, which we were buying, if Russian 13 million barrel goes off, that would have been bought from the Middle East.
You've made that point.
The price would have gone up to $200 a barrel. And who would have? You would have more inflation in Europe than you currently have.
Minister, you've talked about the price pressures. I'm now into geopolitics. It's interesting. You're a former very senior diplomat in the Indian Foreign Service. You understand the way geopolitics works. Is it wise, do you believe, for India to have forged such a close friendship to Vladimir Putin when, according to the UN General Assembly, a massive majority vote, Russia violated Ukraine's sovereignty in this invasion, something which India will not say and will not recognize. Is it wise for India to have got itself into the place it is now in?
No, India is in a very comfortable place. And other than commentators in parts of the world which have, as I said, a limited understanding of the situation, India is in a comfortable position all over. One of the first foreign ministers that the incoming Secretary of State met was the Indian foreign minister. A Quad meeting is taking place here. My Prime Minister has had a discussion with President Trump. I think some of the concerns you're worried about should be addressed to European audiences.
But you believe, believe in international law, don't you?
Oh, I'm not a believer. I'm a practitioner of international law. I've written a book on the use of force. And I think Western Europe is hardly in a position to tell anyone what international law is all about. Let me tell you, we have condemned the use of violence. My Prime Minister has been on record from day one to say this is not the time of war, this is a time of peace. He has said that to President Putin, he's said that to President Zelensky, and that is the point of view which the G20 under the Indian presidency espoused, and that was accepted. The G20 presidency under India is the one which went what consensus, and that is the first consensus document, whereas the GA and everything else was stated. So my submission to you...
it seems to me there's a hypocrisy at work here. You can talk about hypocrisies in the West. I could talk about hypocrisy in India. When it comes to talking sovereignty and when it comes to an issue you have on your own territory with Kashmir and other people's perceptions of Kashmir's status, you talk about the inviolability of sovereignty. But you don't use that language when it comes to Ukraine and its rights.
We use that language consistently, and I want to correct you. Sovereignty as a concept is something we use consistently.
So condemn Putin's violation of Ukrainian sovereignty.
We have said on record, this is not a time for war. We don't condone the use of peace.
That's not a condemnation of Russia's invasion of Ukrainian territory.
I would suggest that you read the Western démarche to end the war. And we are in favor of doing the war. We could have a similar argument on the Middle East, on Palestine, etc. I think if this is a discussion on energy, let me say that the Prime Minister's primary commitment is to ensure that there is availability of energy to our consumer at all points, at affordable rates, and in a sustainable manner. And we've done very well on all three. Insofar as Russia is concerned, yes, we've had long-standing relations with the erstwhile Soviet Union. We have relations with the Russian Federation, but we have much stronger relations with some of the other countries, including the United States. And I would say we buy $20 billion worth of energy from the United States. So the point here is, if it is a discussion on energy, I think it has been completely consistent. And today, we were encouraged by the Americans, by Western Europeans. I think they're out of the equation. They're no longer part of it.
Minister, if I may, I'm going to stop you for a sec, because you've turned the conversation toward America, which is interesting, because Donald Trump, of course, is now in the White House. Donald Trump is determined to use tariffs as and when necessary to change the balance of trade between the United States and key trading partners. He has described India as one of the, quote, kings of tariffs around the world. You can expect tariffs to be imposed on Indian exports to the United States, can't you?
Let me give you a primer on tariffs. Countries are bound by their international obligations. What makes me very happy about what President Trump is saying, and I'll come to tariffs in a minute, he has called for more energy being made available in the world, for the other producers to lower the energy prices. If that happens, the global economy picks up, there's more trade, there's more economic activity, interest rates come down, etc. Insofar as tariffs are concerned, please read carefully what he's saying on energy. It is an attempt to leverage in tariffs also. What he's saying is, if we are a $23 trillion economy and we have open markets, and other countries impose high tariffs on us, well, there are two kinds of tariffs. One are tariffs which you've bound under successive rounds of multilateral trade negotiations, and there are tariffs which you've not bound. Now, if countries are raising their non-bound tariffs or their bound tariffs, there are consequences on that. Insofar as the president is concerned, he will impose tariffs.
Hang on, let's keep this conversation as simple as possible. If the United States goes ahead with threats to impose tariffs on countries like India, and he has fingered India as a problem, will you respond with punitive tariffs on US goods coming into India?
As a diplomat, I don't respond to hypothetical questions. India is a $4 trillion economy, and India will safeguard its interests, whether it does through negotiation to avoid the tariffs or it does through retaliation. It's not for me as the energy minister to speak on. Whether you should have a conversation on that to whoever is designated to exercise that authority.
Here's another issue you have, and as Minister for Petroleum and Natural Gas, you have to consider it very carefully. How does India square its commitment to massively grow the economy and therefore to use much more energy, fossil fuel energy, over the coming years, and at the same time meet its commitments, admittedly in India's case, long-term commitment to decarbonisation? How are you going to do it?
India is the one country I am aware of which has met its Paris commitments, point one. India is the one country where the sustainability transition is better than elsewhere. From 2014 to today, we've got 20% biofuel blending, we've got a massive green hydrogen program, and we are today moving in a situation where on all fronts, the decarbonization debate is succeeding.
But the problem you've got is that you're still massively reliant on coal, the dirtiest fossil fuel for your power. Hang on, let me just finish the point. Coal still generates 75% of India's power. And you're still building new coal-fired power stations.
Again, let me just tell you, power for electricity only accounts for 17% of our overall energy. If you want to look at the total figure, see what is used in our refineries, and they're all moving into green hydrogen. IOCL has 11 refineries, out of them 2 of them first, another 2. So there is a transition taking place which your briefing notes don't capture. Now either you accept what I'm telling you as the energy, I should actually be called the energy transition minister, our biofuel blending on an increasing demand, 20% of that, it's a revolutionary scale change. 90 new flex fuel vessels were on display which are coming to the market in the next 3 months. We've got E100 pure ethanol being sold in 400 outlets. So absolutely, yes, our consumption is increasing. So is our biofuel blending, green hydrogen.
The problem you've got, and that's why I began with this grand ambition to become a fully developed nation by 2047, is that there is no way that's going to happen without maintaining the kind of output from your coal-fired power stations, which mean you're not going to complete your energy transition. To quote Indian expert Nandini Das, who's at Climate Analytics, she says, India still has a very deep focus on coal.
You are welcome to quote, I don't know who these people are, and certainly they don't figure in my discourse at all. A lot of people drawing inspiration from Western NGOs, from people in the West who are extremely jealous of the Indian transition. You're welcome to use whomever's speaking notes you like. But if you're discussing a subject like energy transition, let me point you in 2 specific directions. Please look at the biofuels program and look at what's happening in the Indian green hydrogen field. The tender which IOCL has floated, nowhere in the world have you got this done. The first day I had a meeting with the then Energy Secretary of the United States, Jennifer Greenholm. She said the minute we can get to 1 for 1 for 1, that is 1 kilo of green hydrogen for $1 in 10 years, the energy side. We buy $150 billion of energy from outside. Today, the cost of green hydrogen has come down to 3.5, 4. The minute we bring it down to 2.5, fossil fuel is over. This kind of transition doesn't takes place through fossilized mindsets which say you will never become this. They said you'll never become a $5 trillion economy.
Minister, as far as I can see, this is not a sort of East-West political point scoring
not at all.
Question.
It should not be.
It is really a planetary question.
Yes.
But all I'm asking is whether when you sit in your ministry and make your decisions, you understand that India has a deep vulnerability right here, right now, to the impacts of climate change.
You are trying to remind me of my vulnerability. I'm trying to tell you, I'm not only conscious, but we are doing things in order to ensure that we don't become vulnerable. Today, India is one country which has met its Paris commitments. You should be, as a global news output, addressing those countries which are pulling out of climate change, which want, etc. Today, no one is questioning the transition. In order to meet the transition, you have to survive at the present. Please concentrate on those countries where clean cooking fuel is not available. We are supplying to 1.4 billion people clean cooking medium, LPG or natural gas, at as little as 5 rupees a day to beneficiaries or 15 rupees a day to non-beneficiary. These are the advances India is making. where 30% of the rural population, even in advanced countries, okay, they use firewood, they use this thing. So I don't know how you're going to define.
Right.
We will have a healthcare system,
Minister,
education system, which will have all the ingredients and coordinates of a developed economy much before 2047.
Before we end, Minister, I just want to ask you about your government's vision for your country. And I'm going to use a quote from Ravi Agrawal, who's the editor of Foreign Policy magazine. He talks about a new idea of India prevailing. He says Modi's India is substantially different from Nehru's in terms of this idea. Modi defines nationhood through Hinduism. He believes in a powerful chief executive being preferable to a liberal one. It is, says Agrawal, a form of illiberal democracy. Do you believe in that?
No, I don't. And I think this is a whole lot of, hogwash. There's a fact of the matter is Mr. Nehru was the first Prime Minister of India. He was deeply impressed with and schooled in the Western liberal system. He did a great job. But today, Mr. Modi inherited an economy which is now not gradually, rapidly transforming. Today, India has got confidence back to its pre-colonial days. Hinduism is a way of life. India today is one of the most liberal democracies. Mr. Agarwal is entitled to his views, and Mr. Agarwal is perhaps serving an audience. Let me share with you something. Today, in India, you have a robust democracy. People use the choicest invectives against elected leaders. Try and do that in a Western democracy. See what happens in terms of result. Today, our institutions are functioning. The judiciary, the apex judiciary, the fourth estate, the press, totally free press. These are hallmarks
Minister, you know that journalists in this country do not regard this as a free
I don't know which
press
journalists
and
you're
a free
talking about.
media. You know that outside observers like Freedom House say that India's system is now only, quote unquote, partly free, that organizations like Human Rights Watch say that the government has escalated a crackdown on civil society and the media. You know all this. I just wonder whether you think all of this is justified to deliver the kind of economic growth plan that Modi says he can deliver. Does it justify all of that?
First of all, I don't agree with those characterizations. I don't want to go into individual who said what. But, if I were in your place, I would make an independent assessment rather than be going, somebody is calling it an illiberal democracy. We are, whether the West likes it or not, anybody likes it or not, the world's largest democracy. We're also the mother of democracy. We had republics operating in India in 6th century BC. And today what you witness in India is a very robust democracy which is delivering goods and services to its people. What would you us have? Now, if you have to deliver energy, you have to deliver energy at affordable prices at all times to come and maintain the sustainability. That's been done. Insofar as liberty and democracy is concerned, we have no shortage of it.
Hardeep Singh Puri, we have to end there. Thank you for being on Hard Talk.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.